Welcome to Founders Raw.
Thank you.
All right, Bryan. Yeah, you know, we've chatted.
Yeah, sure.
I know your background a little bit, but if you could take us back to, you know, the early days where you worked, and then how did you transition into starting Glimpse?
Yeah, the unfortunate part is it's going to date me, but I guess you've kind of got to go there. I joined out of college as computer science. Well, actually, I didn't quite know what I was going to do in college. I did political science and then math, and then I ended up getting a degree in computer science, math, and French. But came straight up to Microsoft out of college, and this is where it'll date me. I interned in '90 and started there in '91, which was funny at the time. You'd tell like my mom, I'm going to go work for Microsoft. She's like, who are they?
Oh wow!
It was just this. Windows 3 was just coming out, so it was kind of, oh, they do this thing called MS-DOS, blah 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 blah. So I came up and worked at Microsoft on the engineering track, right? So programming, but went pretty fast into kind of had an attraction to products and a little wider than that. So went into management, and they were growing like gangbusters, right? Mm-hmm. So I was working on the Windows 3.0 and 3.1. In fact, we were working on putting, it's called multimedia extensions for Windows into the PC.
Oh wow!
So it was like making your PC make a sound and play a CD, right? And we were so excited we could do that. We're like, wow, every computer's going to do this. So anyway, that kind of took me on this kind of semi-adventurous path inside of Microsoft. I went and joined the kind of the research group where they were doing
How many
new
employees
stuff.
were it?
They were 5,000. 5,000 employees at the time.
Reasonably big company.
Reasonably big. They just were 15 years old, but now I think they're probably 80, 100,000. Went in, worked on advanced technologies. They were doing interactive TV, kind of more experimental stuff. I worked on embedded systems. So it was great because, you know, at that point it was still a small company, very nimble. Very much a startup focus, very little bureaucracy, super smart people. It was a great place to start working. As time went on and they got bigger and bigger and bigger, you kind of get the urge to get back to that kind of smaller company, more nimble, and kind of stretch yourself a little bit. But I really didn't have much more than a technical background, but I'd find myself getting involved with kind of more product stuff and consumer stuff and a little bit of strategy. So I was going to leave in about 2000. I was ready to go do a startup, and looking back, not knowing what that meant, right? It was kind of like, you know, oh, I want to go be a movie star. Wouldn't that be fun, right? Oh, I'll go do a startup. Imagine your own boss. Wow, that'd be great. And so I was getting ready to do that, and I felt a little ill-equipped from kind of the breadth of my experience at that point. And an opportunity came up to go over to games at Microsoft, and I kind of liked games. Yeah. And it was an opportunity to have a small group with a P&L and kind of a little bit more breadth of marketing and product and da-da-da-da. And the Xbox was coming out, right? So it seemed like a pretty unique opportunity. So I thought, well, okay, I'll go jump on work on this Xbox and games for a couple of years, and then I'll go do the startup. And that ended up being a pretty fun ride. Yeah. Right. I mean, that was a fun time with the Xbox coming out. It was a fun time for a category that's called casual games now. Mm-hmm. At the time, it was just like, hey, let's do these easier, faster games. And that just turned into like 7 or 8 years doing that, right? So 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, wow, this is pretty fun, and I'm learning stuff, but I still do want to go do this startup thing that looks so attractive. So I went and got an MBA while I was going to Microsoft, and then essentially got my MBA and then quit like the day after I graduated. I walked in and said, okay, guys, now I got to go. Yeah. And for me, being older than your normal entrepreneur and coming from kind of a corporate background at that point, it was a pretty big jolt to go do that. Yeah. But I really wanted to give that a shot. So I went and quit.
Just a real quick question. Yeah. You got your MBA. Do you find that was incredibly valuable, or is it just like, was that kind of like a nice jumping, like it kind of forced you to make that jump?
It's a good question. For me, like, I would do it again. The reasons why are it taught me a bit, right? I didn't quite know how to all the accounting and finance stuff, right? So I learned a little bit there. But it gave me a little bit more confidence that, hey, okay, maybe I could run a company. Yeah. Maybe I could be the CEO of a company rather than just joining a startup. And it's been useful, I think, as I've gone out and raised money and stuff to kind of say, listen, I've got an engineering background and an MBA. Yeah. I can go there. So I don't think it was like life-changing, but I'd probably do it again if I had the opportunity.
That's good.
So so I came in, quit, took a few months to transition out. But for me, it was like, listen, I'm either going to retire at Microsoft at this point, right? And I had a nice, enjoyable gig and was comfortable. But I'm either going to stay here, or if I'm ever going to break, because I was going to leave in 2000, and now it's 2008.
Yeah.
So let's do it. So I figured, hey, I better do it. So I jumped off a couple of friends and jumped into Glimpse, right? Mobile phones, location sharing.
Yeah.
We just really liked the space. So that was the plunge, and it's not what I expected, but it's been a really cool experience, right? I've never been bored.
Yeah.
From it.
When you say not what you expected, what does that mean?
It gets romanticized a little bit, the whole startup thing, right? Hey, I'm at a startup, and you kind of have this impression that you're hacking for a few days, and then you put out this thing, and it's like wildfire. People are saying, "Please, can I give you money?" And everybody's like, "Oh, there's the guy that founded such and such company," and it's all the Facebook thing, and in reality, it's a much riskier, slower, less glamorous, higher risk.
It's a grind.
Undertaking. I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you probably had it's like, oh wow, this is a little different than.
It's a psychological roller coaster.
Yeah.
Not to use the worn out analogy, but yeah, I think that. So my question is how, we're kind of fast forwarding, but how do you deal with that? Yeah. Going from I think those are drastic changes. So how did you, just jumping in cold?
Well, I'm a relatively methodical guy, so I really knew it was going to be a shock. So I tried to prepare myself for that shock. So I talked to a lot of folks that had done it. Right, what surprised you? Yeah. Talked to guys that had failed. Why did you fail? What messed you up? And we talked about Jonathan Spizzato. He was a great guy to talk to, right? Because he'd left Microsoft. I'd worked with him in games, and he'd had some very successful companies. What worked for you? Some guys that fail, and they're like, a lot of guys failed because they're like, I didn't realize that once I build a product, I just figured everybody would know about it, right? Because at Microsoft, you build it. There's some department somewhere in marketing that takes care of it for you. And they're like, I built it. It's really cool and it works, but nobody knows about it. How do I tell them? Mm-hmm. I never had to think about that. So kind of these things of failures and successes and things in between. So I went in going, okay, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
Right. And I found it almost therapeutic at some level, this speed at which you could operate, right?
Yeah.
The idea, and it's not a knock on Microsoft, but any large corporation like that, to operate across that broad of a domain with that many people, if you have an idea, you have to socialize it and justify it and do some background and get a bunch of people and wait for the right time to do the presentation to the boss to okay it, to get the budget to go do it, right?
It takes way too long.
Yeah. Where this was just fun because you'd wake up in the morning and you'd look, wow, let's go do this, and you'd crank out a little bit of code, and then you'd try it, let's tweak that. And so I found that piece very therapeutic, right? The thing that I didn't quite get was how hard it was to go from something that was interesting and working to something that was fundable and had a long lifeline and had a business plan and a business model. And could really
is that just continuous iteration, or like?
Yeah, it's continuous iteration, but there's some real step functions on this thing, right? Because you iterate, but at some point you've got to get somebody to give you a little bit of money to pursue the thing, right?
Yeah.
Unless you've got some great money-making idea right off the bat. The vast majority needs some sort of outside. And so you've got to get an angel or somebody in the seed to say, well, that's good enough for me. So you have to hit these functions. Then you get a little bit of money, and it's like, okay, well, now we can maybe hire somebody besides the founders. And you have to go through that. And then it's like, well, now how do I measure this, and where are we going? And then your needs to expand become more and more expensive, and the competition starts to creep in, and the macro environment of the space you're in changes, and competitors come and go. So it's I still, since we started the company, I almost every day when I wake up and check the news or I look at my phone, I'm waiting for an alert to come in of like something changed. Somebody bought somebody else, somebody's issued a competing product, your stuff's crashing, who knows, right? But you kind of have this like literally on the edge of your seat permanently, right? So you're kind of in this permanent adrenaline piece. It was funny, today we were doing a panel and we had one of the guys back out and everybody's all upset. Oh no, what are we going to do? And I was just like, I just don't panic anymore because my life's just kind of a steady panic. So I just learn to absorb it.
That's actually such a good thing. Like, it's like steady, and don't panic. Like things happen, but you can also. It's the way you respond to some of those challenges.
Yeah,
right?
I remember where I learned this early. Was at Microsoft. We were launching some new game thing, I think Games for Windows or something. And we had a big press event down in the Valley. We're showing all this stuff, and we go in there to get this thing working. We've been weeks in the process. The press was there, and some of the cables weren't displaying right. And the guy giving the presentation, I'm just like dying. I'm like, we got to get this fixed. And he's just like, we'll make it work, right? If it doesn't work, we're going to get it. And just to see how cool he was, I was just like, wow, one day I want to remain that calm, with conflict. And it's really, but what I realized is it doesn't do any good to panic against that stuff, right? I mean, you keep
And
a clear
I also
head.
think that's a big lesson for, if you're leading a company, all your employees are looking at you and how you respond to anything.
Yeah.
So if you're freaking out about things, well, what are they going to do?
So I was given one of my very early pitches to some VCs. It might have been probably the first 2 or 3 VCs I talked to. This was a partnership meeting, right? So this is where they brought the whole team in. We're going to decide whether or not to invest in Glimpse, make or break. And I was doing my presentation, and the thing failed. The screen went dark, and the cable stopped working, right? And I remember trying to get it to work, and we'll do this, and I was just like, well, close that and let's just talk about it. Not thinking anything about it. Afterwards, one of the partners was there, talked to me a few days afterwards. He says, one of the reasons they're interested in your company is they liked how you handled that very stressful, potentially stressful situation. And I had no idea, but that was a thing. And like you say, you've got that, and then you can't, like, I've had 3 or 4 times where, like, I'm just like panicking. I'm like, wow, how am I going to deal with that? But you're right, everybody's looking at you, right, to decide how to do that. And I remember one of the first vacations I took, I've been working very hard for 2 or 3 years. It took a week to go on vacation with the family, and I got a phone call, like our first day. I'm at the lake on the sand going, okay, let's exhale. The phone rings, and I actually think it might have been John Cook. It was John Cook, or it was my PR person calling and saying, hey, Apple just launched this Find My Friends app, right? That's kind of along the same avenues of what we do. And people are emailing me going, sorry, dude, it was a good run. Oh, that must suck, right, to have those guys do that. And the teams forwarded it to me like, did you guys see the news, And my first reaction was like, oh crap, the largest, most innovative software company in the world has now got us in their sights. But then you breathe deep and you really look at it, and there's always, you always have some advantage being a startup. And actually after I inhaled and thought about it, I was like, well, listen, it's not going to be a problem because, not to get into the technical details, but what they allow you to do is jumping through a lot of hurdles of signing up and getting an account to have people that have iPhones share their location permanently, essentially, with other folks. And when you look at it, it doesn't really compete against what our value proposition was. And as a matter of fact, it turned out that got us a lot of, the Wall Street Journal headline, or the All Things D headline said, Apple copies Glimpse, or Apple adds Glimpse functionality. It was beautiful for us. We got more downloads than we'd ever had before, and and really, to be honest with you, I think it's good it's out there today. It's been a net positive for us. But it's just an example of you can't panic. Panic doesn't help you anything, right? And usually, a cool head, and I do this now. As a CEO, you watch other companies, you see these just huge difficulties happening, and you instantly feel for that CEO. You're like, crap, he's in a boardroom right now trying to figure out how he's going to respond to X, Y, Z. I mean, this was just a couple of days ago. I think it was, Netflix had a pretty big stumble a year ago with how they were marketing, how they're doing DVDs, and everybody's like, and they had 2 in a row. It's like, what's this company doing? They're going to get their butts kicked because everybody else is doing this, and they can't transition. And I think just like yesterday, they just
they blew out
earnings, and their stocks through the roof because the CEO kept a cool head, right, and didn't panic and didn't read all the press and didn't go wring his hands. He's like, well, what are we going to do as a company? And they survived.
So that brings up a thought. Who do you look to in our industry, or maybe even outside, whether they personally mentor you or you just kind of virtually mentor, like who do you look to get some sort of...
There's a few people I really like. It's not like, I haven't thought too deeply about this, but I think Jonathan Spozzato is a unique individual. Different skill sets than I have, but I think he's got an insight and a charisma and a strategy and the ability to, I think, lead by people wanting to follow him. Right? He doesn't scare people, right? I mean, you sit down and talk with him, you're the most important person in the world when he's sitting down and talking to you, but he's serious about doing business, right? So I think he's a great example. I remember early on in the company, there's a guy, Phil Levin, who's the CEO of Evernote. Right? So this was early on, though. I went to a conference about monetization down in the Valley, and everybody's wringing their hands about monetization and freemium, and it's broken and it doesn't work. And And I remember this guy stands up out of the audience and goes, why is everybody here bellyaching about it? He goes, listen, I'm going that model, and I think it's phenomenal, and here's why, right?
This was before Evernote was big?
Yeah, nobody knew who he was, right? And but you could tell right there, okay, here's a guy who's not like just trying to listen to conventional wisdom and take notes, and I better shut up. And he's like, no, listen, we are going to do freemium, and we are going to nail it, and here's why my company is very well positioned to do this. Very early on, I should go find the date. But, so I talked to him after, right, and it was great. And then to see how over the years he's following this and blazing his own path, he's built a fantastic company.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. And so, do you stay close with him, or is that more kind of a distant?
Just when I see him at conferences, we'll talk, hook up. Yeah, I talked to a lot of people early on, and now I don't so much. Not that I don't want to, but I just naturally you meet a lot of people at conferences and stuff. And so
do you work with younger entrepreneurs right now? Do you?
Yeah, here's what's really interesting. It's very funny because, like I say, when I started, I'd bring people up out of the blue, right, that had done stuff in interesting spaces and investors and things. Just, I want to pick your brain, help me understand it. And I was very surprised how accessible everybody was. I don't think anybody ever turned me down. And these are really important folks with busy schedule. I remember Rich Barton, I called up and said, Rich.
He's a nice guy.
I'd love to pick your brain, right? He doesn't know me. He doesn't know me at all, other than, I guess he worked at Microsoft at some point. Sat down, talked to me. It was fantastic. So, anyways, you fast forward now, and I probably get 3 or 4 a week of entrepreneurs saying, "Hey, can I pick your brain? Can I ask you about something?" And so I always try to make time to, anybody who wants to talk, I'll talk with. Sit down once and let them know what I know. And so it's really interesting to think I'm on the other side of that table in some situations.
Exactly.
For folks. Yeah.
And what are you seeing in terms of? What are like the 1 or 2 things that you're seeing the most common mistakes that you seem to be like leading someone a slightly different direction?
They're pretty common, and there's a couple of key ones. One, which I talked about earlier, is a good idea. If you don't have a way to get it into the market, doesn't matter, right? So it's just as, in fact, a guy this morning, I went in early, and this is a smart guy, right? And he was an exec at a large company. And he came in with his pitch deck, and it's just like, it's great, but you haven't convinced anybody how, even if that is a great idea, how you position it and get people to use it. So I think people miss that. And then, I try to be supportive, but I'm kind of harsh on startup folks, because what happens is you come up with an idea, and then you ask your best friend, hey, what do you think? Yeah. Oh yeah, John, that's a great idea, right? Hey, Mom, what do you think? Yeah. Oh, sure, right? And part of it is some people haven't experienced startups and don't know what that world is like. Naively would say, well, go do your thing like Facebook. And then the other one is people are they want to be nice, right? And so they're going to be supportive. It's like, hey, do you like my artwork, right? Oh yeah, of course. That looks great.
Well, Bob Crimmins said the same thing. That's one of the exact same question. His answer was, you need to get in front of people that actually don't like your idea, and then find out why. Yeah. Because listen to their honest truth, figure it out, because that's where you're going to maybe see things about your business or concept that you actually see the other side of the table.
Yeah. When I go talk to on the investment front, when I talk to folks that end up saying, no, I'm not going to invest, I actually get a lot out of those meetings. Right? It's like, well, why, and what didn't you like? And then you have to evaluate if you think they've got an angle you don't know about. But when we raised our original money, I'd been at Microsoft, so I knew a few folks that had some money, and at MBA school I had a few friends that had some money, and so I probably could have raised our money going to family and friends. And we specifically said we're not going to do that.
And why is that?
Because I had friends on both sides that probably would say, okay, Bryan, you're pretty smart, I'll throw some money at you. We wanted to go and get some folks that didn't know us and had no track record, and hone our ability to be able to position our company and what we're going to do from purely I want to invest in your company standpoint.
So I've thought this for a long time about friends and family, and I don't think I would take friends and family, because I think it puts something in between that relationship. And of course, when you sit down with them, you're like, look, you assume that you're going to lose this.
I know, but still.
But still, right? So whenever I hear friends and family, I'm like, I don't know if I would even go there.
Yeah, there's 2 extremes. I won't go into details, but I had a friend who did an entire friends and family thing, build a startup, and it just misled him. It misled him what his company was worth. It misled him how good his idea was, and I didn't want that to happen. What I actually did is I was fairly methodical. I was like, listen, I'm going to take a little bit from friends. I'm going to get some from completely independent folks. I wanted exactly one family member in, and he didn't even put in that much. But I wanted one because I wanted to have that situation of motivation of like, I'm going to see him at the family reunion,
yeah.
and I'm going to have to say, sorry, I lost your money.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, to be honest with you, when you're in difficult times, it was actually like, crap, I got to make this thing work.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. You can say all you want. Hey, it's high risk. You're going to lose your money, and they mean it at the time. But you lose somebody $50,000. It's
going to be an issue, man.
You don't forget that,
yeah.
right? So you got to be careful about it.
Interesting. So we're about done here, but what would be, if you had like a first-time founder that was sitting there thinking like, man, I've got this idea. I think I'm going to quit my job. What would you tell them?
You've got to be super passionate about it, because everything's kind of sexy when you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be a startup and this is a great idea, and you're going to get you're going to get gut punched. Doesn't matter how good of an idea. There's going to be gut punches coming in, and if you don't have enough motivation to really want to follow that through, so it's got to be like, it's not like I want to go ski in Aspen, and I'd like to get a new car, and I want to do a startup, and these things. It's like, it's got to be, you know what? I am going to do a startup. If that means sacrifice this and this and this and this, and I don't go to sports events, and I don't watch movies, and I don't take vacation, and I clamp down on the budget, I am going to do that startup. If you've got that, then that's why I kind of push back on.
You test them a little bit.
Then I wouldn't do it, because it's harder than most people think, and like I said, I went in with a pretty open eyes, so it's about as hard as what I thought. But I came in pretty pessimistic. The one thing I didn't quite get was, people said, oh, it's really lonely as a CEO. I didn't quite understand what that meant. It's really lonely as a CEO.
And you're saying that because the people around, like your team, because you're the leader, and it's hard to be 100% truth, or like to spill all the data.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just the team, but it's your investors, and it's, you just don't, nobody who's not another CEO, it's kind of like, I think it's kind of like you've been to war with somebody, and you can say, oh yeah, I'm sure war's tough, but if you haven't been to it, you probably don't quite get it. If you haven't really done the CEO thing, you don't get it. We have a WTIA, and I think I can say it exists. I can't go into the details about it, but they have we started about 6 months ago, a CEO roundtable where the CEOs of similar sized companies get together, all confidential, and talk about, hey, and it's therapeutic to finally talk to somebody about, this situation. Well, how did you feel? How did you deal with it? So that was really great. But until then, it was just like there's not too many people you can be completely transparent with. I don't know if transparent is the right word, but.
And do you feel it's right to withhold some of that around your team? Or do you think
we try to stay really transparent with the team. So I let them in on the finances and the fundraising, and when things go bad, we really try to stay very open. But sometimes it takes a little while for you to absorb stuff, right? And so when something negative happens, you kind of like keep that brave face for a day or two until you figure out what you're going to do.
How to handle this.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I think you've got to, it depends on your personality, but I try to stay transparent, and I think that people value that in the long run.
Cool. Well,
all right,
thank you very much.
Cheers. Really appreciate it. Good to talk to you.